Well, hello. Welcome back to this is week 5
I
of
know.
the Bible recap.
It's been kind of crazy.
Yeah. So, and I got to think on the all right.
47 more to go.
I think I realized that when I posted last week's video, I forgot to put up the map.
Oh, you did?
So,
Yeah.
We'll put it in
I'm
the
going to put up
comments
the
on
map
the.
right now.
Yeah.
Pause to look, and away we go.
Happens.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, was just trying. I was like, I don't think I posted the map that I shared at the end of last week. So if I did, great, but I don't remember doing it. So, all right. Well, Tyler, I think I'll let you kick us off with the questions
good.
this week, and we'll just keep going like we did last week.
Popcorn it a little bit.
Perfect.
All right, let's get started. So we have days 29 through 35. And our first question this week is, what do you think God is demonstrating by repeatedly foregoing this, so I don't even know how,
Social, I guess.
Societal.
norm? Yeah, that makes sense. We'll start over. What do you think God is demonstrating by repeatedly foregoing the societal norms of primogeniture, where the oldest son gets his blessing? Does this seem familiar? Why or why not?
Well, what we've seen previously in Genesis with Jacob, and of course, mixed. Of course, there's been a little manipulation around that, but that was part of the prophecy. So, I think, it's said in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Study Bible here that God chooses, not necessarily relies on social customs to move His will forward. So, it also shows, for me, also I think that as it emphasizes later in the New Testament, that God doesn't have preference. He doesn't, just because it's oldest doesn't mean they always get the double blessing.
Yeah.
It's, everyone's equal before God's eyes.
Yeah.
I kind of just added that he liked to do the unexpected and then blesses the undeserved.
And I think it's also to show like our social norms. We can't just fall into the complacency with it. Like sometimes I feel like shakes us up a little bit to show there's a reason why I'm doing this. It's for the love of us, for the belief of Him, and gives us enough to, kind of push that what everyone else is doing isn't necessarily what we need to be doing.
Well, and I think it goes to even further, the underlying purpose of what God has, because we also get there at the end before Israel dies. He gives His blessings to the kids, and then the top 3 are like, all right, there's consequences to your previous actions. Judah, now you get the blessing of the oldest, which he's fourth in line. And of course, then that's where Jesus' line comes out.
Yeah. And that was one of the things I have written down too. When it doesn't seem fair, I was like, but I think God is kind of showing to Him. We've noticed throughout, from our small group and a couple other things, that lineage is very important. Knowing where you came from almost, and giving us that idea. So showing that, the head of the household isn't necessarily the firstborn, doesn't, shows the lineage up to Jesus, with Judah. And Tara, when I was listening to her actually just a little bit ago, I was trying to refresh and make sure, because this was a little bit ago when, I've slept a few times since then. She gave a really just explaining why Judah was the not the firstborn, or not. I'm sorry, the head of household.
Yeah.
And since it was Reuben, was that he slept with his father's concubine, and then the next oldest 2, the names are not coming.
Simeon and Levi.
Yes, and when they killed all of the men of
They were in retaliation.
Yeah, for their sister. It kind of helps to know why Judah became, like, it's not just because God chose, like there was reasons why too. Like, that was kind of beneficial for me just to it's great that God has choices in every area, can push us in the direction, but also giving us like the reason why. We always ask why. Like that helped me kind of get through all of that. So,
Ready for question 2?
I think so.
Recalling Abraham's lies about Sarah and Isaac's lie about Rebekah, how are the lies of the Hebrew midwives different? What does this reveal about God?
This was one that, in my opinion, this lie was different because it benefited more than just the present. It was benefiting kind of everyone involved, rather than just Isaac or just Sarah. Like those were almost like defiant lies, if that makes sense, where this one was almost God's work in a lie. Does that make sense what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of where my head was going with all of that. Like they were doing it for the benefit of others.
I wrote that I felt like they felt the power that God had, and they were choosing wisely because they were trusting in His power, in His maybe fear too, but
yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to when we were in Job. When I talked about the virtue ethic and whatnot, where we don't have a straight hard line description of everything you're not supposed to do, because there's some foundational things that guide our decisions, and that's where I think as you point out at the beginning, is that the lies from Abraham and Isaac were very selfish and self-serving, and demonstrates a lack of faith. Where, as you both said, with these lies from the midwives, there is an element of faith and of greater morality or ethics in protecting the life of somebody. And of course, it's one of their own, where children are the sign of the blessing.
Yeah.
And so that's where sometimes when we come at so black and white with lies, I think sometimes we miss what is actually going on. And the fact that, in a sense, yes, it's okay to lie, especially if you're trying to protect someone else's life.
Yeah.
Number 3, God shows up to Moses and gives him an assignment after he had murdered someone. How would you feel if your pastor or boss had murdered someone before they became your leader? Wonderful question.
yeah, for you.
How do you think...
need you might need to step out.
How do you think that incident would impact them and their view on their ability to lead?
This was one that I had a little bit harder answering. And I tried to look at it from what I'd call a healthy Christian values, not just my values. So kind of in Moses' situation, he did it protecting someone else, because from my understanding of this, there was an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. He was doing it to try to help his people. And sometimes, as we all sometimes do in sinning, or doing a good thing, we go too far where it becomes a sin. And so I try to think of it that way versus, trying to do a good thing with and became bad, I guess, if that's the best way to say it. And then with that, me personally, it'd be hard for my personal values to see someone, a pastor or a boss in a leadership role who has taken a life. But I think it's all, is the person truly sorry? Have they asked for forgiveness? They have their own demons and they have to deal with that as well. So at the end of the day, if they can ask for forgiveness, I should be able to give it to them, even though I'm not a part of that. So I don't think it'd be a hard thing not to think about, but at the same time, I would hope in that situation, I would be able to forgive them and have to hopefully listen to what they have to say. So I know that doesn't really answer the question, but that's kind of where I went with it. It's kind of hard to, unless you've been in that circle, you don't really know how you're going to react. So, but, yeah.
What do you think, lady?
Well, when you go back to their time, it seems like that kind of stuff happened a lot. So I just put it in today's perspective. It'd be very difficult for me to trust that pastor or the leader. But I would hope that I had enough understanding that I could maybe come around to that. But I mean, brutally honest, it would be very tough for me to, if whatever your reasonings were, it would be difficult for me to understand that, just because, again, in today's world, you just don't do that.
There's an interesting movie, definitely not for kids, called The Boondock Saints.
Yeah.
And have you seen it?
Yep.
So the premise of this movie is that these two brothers, they are rough around the edges, but they receive a call to kill bad guys, like mob bosses, pimps, and and
Scum of the earth.
And it creates a really weird question, I think, that caused the audience to really struggle with. What if, people are called, could it be called by God to kill that as evil, which is good may flourish. That's a line from the movie.
Yeah.
And because even they trip over themselves, yet it's successful each time. So it's, it seems like God's hands in it, but it's
it's a good movie, but yes, it is very much a mature movie to watch.
Yeah.
So
Blood and language and
Yeah.
but when you bring that up, it's you would hope our God would not do that, but for the greater of humanity, you never know. So
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a struggle that a lot of people wrestled with when Paul showed up, because Paul was a murderer. And of course, one of his first trips to Jerusalem after he became a Christian was like, they totally avoided him. It was like, we don't, he just, was there, with the stoning of Stephen, and he's, persecuting, and, who knows how many people he actually may have been around for their death and killed himself. But he was at least arresting a lot of Christians. And so I think it's a question I think the church has always had to struggle with, starting right there with Paul. And of course, take some of the not lesser, but the less violent sins to where, someone falls or struggles, what's the redemption or grace or reconciliation that needs to happen around a leader, because that's something the church is struggling with today. For pastors falling because of money or infidelity.
Sure.
So,
yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking throughout this is God is all about redemption. I truly believe if you feel it, really ask for forgiveness from God, that he will build you back up. So that's in one thing, just like what you mentioned, yeah.
So,
all righty. Give me the 19 line paragraph here. All right. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 21 and chapter 7, verse 3, God warns Moses about what will happen when he speaks to Pharaoh. God will harden Pharaoh's heart. These are hard verses to wrestle with, but try to think through some of the implications together. If God did this, was it fair? Why or why not? What does Pharaoh deserve? Is it okay to wrestle with the question? It is okay to wrestle with the question internally. If you choose to discuss this, aim to respect the viewpoints of others and their understanding of God in the Scriptures. So, I think we can. I had it here. I thought maybe I didn't.
Are you going to read the?
Yeah, I was going to read it real quick, just so if I can get it there. 4, verse 21. Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see what you perform before Pharaoh and all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. So that was chapter 4, verse 21, and then verse 7:3. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and through that, and although I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. So, kind of just reiterating that.
So I am a little confused on this because in trying to figure out what God's intentions were, I mean, I don't know why you would want to harden. My first thought was he was trying to teach Pharaoh a lesson, but then if he was hardening his heart, there really wasn't a lesson to be learned because Pharaoh didn't know that that's what he was trying to do. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think I'm kind of changing my answer. I'm not sure why God did that, and is it fair? But I'm not sure anything that God did in the Old Testament was fair.
Yeah.
I mean, there was always a lesson to be learned somewhere in there, but my first thought was because it was for Pharaoh's account, but I can't say that now. So maybe it was more for Moses too.
So
I don't know. Did you just keep trying to set your people free? I mean, was it teaching him patience? Was it teaching him?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've kind of had, after rereading this, and it kind of just, my first one was, I don't know if God is meaning the physical of hardening his heart, or, and this is a stretch, so this is that God gave us free will in the beginning, giving him the ability to harden his own heart. So God is taking responsibility for the actions of his children.
What's your thought there?
But that's kind of it for that one. But the second one, I almost think God did it so we would have the importance of the Passover. If he didn't harden his heart, we wouldn't have had the plagues, the ability to see his enormous power, and also to have the relevance of the Passover, which then we'll get into in another question, shows symbolism towards other things in the good books. So that was kind of my light bulb hit as I started reading this again.
That's a good thought.
But so I could go either way. I could argue either one, and then I also see holes in both of them. So that was kind of just where my thoughts went.
Yeah, I think it's multi-layered in a sense that to harden someone's hearts, in the description in the Hebrew, is to make them impermeable to reason, which one scholar has described it. And so in a sense, you got to realize that Pharaoh was to be understood as a god, and that the Egyptian gods were, the powers, because at this time, Egypt was probably the world's superpower at the time. And so, in a sense, they needed to be knocked down a peg to realize that God was God, not Pharaoh, not all these others. And so, and of course, I'm a free will guy too. And so I think of it this way. If I were to slap Tyler, I would harden his heart against me.
Probably would. Yeah.
And so I think it's God acts, but also in a sense, because Scripture also says, Pharaoh hardened his heart. So there's God's action, but there's also Pharaoh's own reaction to what's going on. Because, in those first three plagues, he was able to have his magicians duplicate it. Says, see, we can do it too. And of course, it just makes matters worse.
Yeah.
When they, duplicate the frogs and the blood and whatnot. But then they get the point, it's like, we can't do what Moses is doing. We can't stop what Moses was doing, even though and also they couldn't even stop the previous ones. They could duplicate it, but they couldn't stop it. And so for them, it was a real wake up call. And I'm glad she points out in the book here that the plagues were basically a smack in the face to the other Egyptian gods. And I know Ray Vonderland in his book covers the individual gods in one of his studies. And so I think there's, again, different layers on there, but I think that's one of the biggest ones is that there's this demonstration that God is God, not all these others. Because remember Pharaoh's first words, I don't know this, Lord.
Yeah.
And of course, his first answer to Moses and Aaron was no. And then, of course, it then came compromise. Well, the guys can go. Well, the guys and the people can go, but the animals got to stay. And then, of course, now we get to that. It's like, okay, everybody leave because this is now, too much. And
I'm really glad you brought up that point. I kind of forgot about it. And when I was listening to it, I wanted to write it down and I didn't. But how the plagues matched up to their gods. I never been into Egypt mythology or anything along those lines, but kind of being able to hear that, I ended up looking into it a little more, and I was like, it's almost God's way of saying, I'm the only one. Like, I know what you're thinking, but I am the one and the only. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So for God's demonstration of his power to overcome the Egyptian gods and Pharaoh, then I think really gets to your point. So, okay, now we have this redemption of a people that then sets up, of course, then everything else that comes down the road later.
So,
fully loaded.
Yeah.
That was fully loaded.
That was an optional question.
Yeah,
We'll say that.
It's labeled as optional for those who know the book. It's
So there's a lot there, and I think we've only skimmed the surface with that. There's a lot but
complicated.
Yeah, and I think it's and everyone's gonna have a different opinion with that too. So, but yeah.
Number 5. The Israelites don't believe God's promises because of their broken spirits and harsh circumstances. Can you relate? How has God proven himself to be kinder than you had the faith to believe or hope for?
It's easy to look back when times are tough. We look at for us. We've got technology. We can communicate with people across the internet, and sometimes we have those moments where it seems rough, whether it's politics, economy. And it's like, remember the good old days, and whether it's the 90s or 80s, or sometimes we picture the 1950s, and I think it's just part of human nature.
To quote The Office, I wish I knew it was the good old days when it was the good old days. So
yes.
So, but yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. But, and also, as we grow up, we look forward to being adults, and then we get to adults. It's like, man,
I want to be a kid again.
I wish I could. I was 12 again.
Be nice, for sure.
You guys got any other thoughts? So that was a pretty.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah. All right, number 6. What can we learn from God's distinct treatment of the Israelites who doubt him, the Egyptian servants who fear him, and the Egyptians who don't fear him?
This was one that was hard for me to answer. So one of the things, and it kind of goes with the question, is while reading this, I didn't realize the amount of, when they were on their way out, the amount of Egyptians and actually people that left. They're estimated, when I was listening to her, that almost 3 million people left. And that's a lot. And the opening of eyes by seeing, we call them plagues, but really miracles for God's people. We did these, and it didn't affect them, their area. But that's where I kept thinking with this is just Not necessarily that, just how amazing God is to be able to change, to help 3 million people get to the promised land, you know. So I know that doesn't answer the question, but that's where my mind was going with that question. Yeah.
I don't know. You know, you could even, this is going to sound a little crazy, but you could even put that in today and the COVID. And so Fauci making his, you know, that you have to have the vaccine, you have to have the COVID shot, and if you don't, I mean, I think those people were treated differently than the ones that went that way with him. I mean, it's just, it's,
Modern examples.
yeah.
Well, think in our own family, you've got blood relatives, and then you have close friends, and there are situations where, you know, blood is blood, and then of course, you know, friends, and then there's everyone else.
Yeah.
And so I think in our own lives we practice some distinction to where the closer you are to family, whether it's blood or you're considered family, the more distinct your treatment is of them. And so, we know, of course, we know later that there's God-fearers amongst the people of Israel. And so, you know, and again, part of the goal from Genesis 15 was that to be a blessing to the world. And so I think, again, we kind of see that teaser that the people that God is wanting to redeem is not just these blood Hebrew Israelite people who are going to be traveling the desert now, but it's going to eventually going to include everybody.
Yeah.
And so, in a sense, they get, how I describe it, kind of tucked into the promise, because again, we saw with Tamar, who's who's not a blood relative, and spoiler, we're going to see Rahab when they get to the promised land, who's not a blood relative, but again, they're part of the bloodline of Jesus.
Yeah, and that's what we've talked about in our small group before, just how imperfectly perfect the bloodline was. Yeah, if that makes sense. Like, bringing every walk of life, rich or poor, good, bad, you know, everything in between, to get to the perfect being. So I've never really learned it that way until here within the last couple of months, and it's kind of opened my eyes to how we treat people. You know, you shouldn't be treating people off of, you know, their social status or anything in between. We're all God's people. So,
Oh, I want to clarify, Hebrews/Israelites. There's a group called the Hebrew Israelites who are kind of cult-like. So, Hebrew/Israelites. So, because if someone watches this, be like, "Oh, he believes in the Hebrews." It's like, no, not that group, modern day group. I'm referring to the people, thousands.
We're talking
of years
those
ago.
people. These people
in the book of Exodus.
Yeah.
Anyways. So, good.
All right.
Number 7.
Is it me?
You got another long one there.
Gosh, dang. All right. Much like Christian's book, sorry, tried to put 2 words together there. Much like Christians look back at the resurrection of Christ for hope, Jewish people throughout history have looked back at Exodus and to the Passover for hope. Just as Christians celebrate Easter annually, the Jews celebrate Passover annually. In fact, the timeline for the annual events overlap. We can read Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 and Mark 14:1 aloud. In the Passover story, how do we see God setting the stage for his people to understand the significance of Jesus' death? Do we want to read that?
We can. I won't be able to from my Jewish study Bible.
Let me.
Which one you grabbing?
I'll get the Corinthians.
Okay.
First Corinthians, I should say. All right. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. Helps if I get on the right page. Get rid of the old yeast so that you may be new unleavened batch as you really are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed.
Yep. Referring to remove the yeast.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Mark 14:1 is, it was now only 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The leading priests and teachers of the law were trying to find a way to use some trick to arrest Jesus and kill him.
So with this, I was going with more of like the symbolism of each. Not only just the timelines matching these similar times of year, but I was thinking of like kind of with Jesus in the Last Supper, and then them having a supper the night before, being ready. Jesus was, from what I remember in the Last Supper anyways, kind of giving them their final, say, get ready if something's going to happen, and go from there. Kind of that connection there. And then the firstborns being sacrificed, I guess is the best way. God sacrificed his own, and he killed the firstborns of anyone who was not his people, and giving the sign of the cross over their door, which is another symbolism of Jesus Christ. So his sacrifice for us. So that's kind of where I went with more of the symbolism of that.
I agree. I did add that, the week before Jesus' death was setting the stage to me for redemption, for forgiveness, and kind of like the whole sacrifice was putting it kind of in that category.
Yeah, it's part of God's wonderful timing, but like, don't miss it. As it was, in the time of Moses. And of course, Jesus, he is the sacrificial lamb. That's where God's timing is so wonderful. And especially even when Jesus teaching, like I mentioned last Sunday, when, I'm the light of the world, and at the particular ceremony. And so I think, answering more directly to her question, how do we see God setting the stage for his people to understand the significance? I think the fact that they, it's for them to remember that back at the time of Moses, how, of course, the eldest of every human being and animal, the significance of the cost of redemption, because Pharaoh's heart was hardened each time. And so it takes this big thing to really set the people free. And of course, redeem is to purchase, to buy back, so to speak. And so for Jesus to be sacrificed is then to buy back the people, for us, for our freedom from the true prison and consequence, which is of course sin. And so for God to set this, set the stage, again, as I said at the beginning, don't miss what's going on here for what Jesus did. And so, of course, the Jewish people quite a bit missed it. And so it's incumbent upon us as we read the story to not miss it either.
It's me in it.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
You're good.
Number
You're good.
8. God gave the Israelites instructions for how to celebrate and remember him and his goodness to them, whether times were good or bad. When are you most likely to forget God? In struggle and in lack, or in abundance and ease? Mine's in abundance and ease.
Yep. You don't really think of asking for help when everything is good. And not necessarily just asking for help, or even one thing I've been trying to work on this year is just thanking God for my situation, good, bad, ugly, anything in between. I'm here, I got a little girl at home, I got my wife, and then I have another one on the way. Just being thankful for the position I am today. that's trying to, but I haven't always been like this. I was, up until probably about a year or two ago, it was the only time I had really thought about God or anything in between was when things were bad, and asking for help at that point to ease my pain. But other than that, it wasn't really, up front. And so that's kind of where my growth has come a lot of just trying to accept every day as a gift and move on.
We tend to learn more in the wilderness than we do on the mountaintop.
Yeah.
And I know I mentioned this probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. When we see in Scripture, the time that the people learned the most, even though it was hard, it was, lack of water or food, as we see here and during the Exodus, those were times they had to learn the lessons to rely on God. And so I think that's, as much as we presume that we should receive blessings and comfort and life should be a little bit easier, the fact that God has us go through those hard times to learn to trust Him, to follow Him. I think of Isaiah 30:20. You receive the bread of adversity and water of affliction, but your teacher will not be hidden no more from you. Whether you wander to the right or to the left, you will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way, follow it."
Yeah.
That's one of the first verses I actually memorized.
Yeah.
When I got my little Good News Bible, that little red one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this the things you remember, and then that's always stuck with me because I can just
throw it out there.
Throw it out there right there.
It's not right there, I promise.
Yeah, it's not in front of me. I promise you, it's not written down. So let's see, number 9. Some of the Israelites disobeyed God's commands for the Sabbath by gathering manna on that day. From their actions, what can we discern about their beliefs about God? I think it's that lack of trust that there was enough given on what would have been Friday for them that would satisfy them on Saturday.
Yeah, that's exactly. They don't trust God. Don't trust in Him to provide when needed. The one thing with the manna, I don't know, I may have mentioned here, I went to a Catholic elementary school, so when it would hit Advent, we would go very deep into all of this, and we even went down into what manna was. So every time they speak of it, they kind of put it as a point of, it was your nutritional value you needed, probably not much taste, probably wasn't, the best thing you ever had, but it kept you alive. Yeah. And every time that's exactly what I think. I think of almost like a marshmallow almost, and that had no taste.
Tasteless one.
Yeah, no taste, but
not sure a marshmallow would keep you alive.
No, but it would. Or cauliflower. That's pretty close to it. So, but that's kind of, I don't know if everyone knew that, but that's just where my mind goes every time manna is mentioned. So I'm sure it wasn't the most fun thing, but to eat every day and go from there. But
yeah, because Hebrew literally translated manna as what is it? It's just because it was there, and of course it just in my Bible here it talks about being basically kind of like a little flake.
Yeah.
That and collect enough to satisfy.
Yeah. So He did provide, and I think it was kind of too. God was saying, as their punishment for 40 years in the wilderness, provided enough to supply them, but I'm not going to give you steak and potatoes every day. So that was
I'm going to read you a little note here because this was interesting because this is their theory on the manna. The tradition about the manna may have its origin in the sweet edible honeydew found in parts of the Sinai in June and July. Scale insects and plant lice ingest the sap of the tamarisk tree and excrete it onto the branches, from which it crystallizes and falls to the ground as sticky solids. Bedouin use it as a sweetener. If this was manna, the miracle was that it arrived just when the Israelites needed it, that that enough was produced to feed the entire people, but never more than an omer, which is, they say, about 2.3 liters. And it doubled on the sixth day. So that's contrary to its natural pattern, since it appeared in Scripture year round.
Yeah.
So that sounds nasty.
Doesn't sound great. Yeah.
But it was interesting to see that was their theory. So, this is what a possible, but I like the idea that God, produced it himself and had it from the sky instead of an insect excreting it out and falling to the ground.
I would agree.
Things we learn.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Whose turn is it?
I think it's mine. So, like we end every week, what was your favorite thing about reading about God's character and your God shots from the week? I'll let Dawn go first so I don't steal hers again.
Oh, you can. I have to find mine again. I didn't write it down. I just marked it in my book. Actually, I had two. But I think the one I like the best is day 34.
You didn't steal mine, so we're good.
Okay. So he has solutions we can't even conceive of. Who wouldn't even think to pray for a path through the sea? The military strategy doesn't exist, but our warrior God wages his own kind of warfare. He fights for us against all things that threaten our relationship. And if we're honest with ourselves, we are often our own worst enemy. Our flesh is more present and more persistent than any outside enemy. So that means sometimes he fights against us while he's fighting for us. He knows better than we do. He loves better than we do. And he helps eradicate the things that distract our hearts from him to help us remember that he's where the joy is. So I think just when, going back to hardening Pharaoh's heart and everything, that's when just kind of spoke to me.
Yeah.
That he does know better than us. So he was in control at all times.
Yep. Mine was day 30.
Oh.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, God uses broken people. Moses is raised in a home of the wicked, paranoid bigot who wants him dead. He murdered a man and goes to the Lamb. He's either insecure or disobedient or both, but he is a man God appoints over his people. If you've had a crazy life, or if you're a parent who worries that your mistakes have ruined everything for your child, take heart. God has nothing but sinners to work with, and he seems to specialize in using the unlikely. He calls to those the furthest from him and draws them near. That's the best news of all, because he's where the joy is.
That is a good one. That must have been yours.
That was
it
mine
yours?
too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just proves every day God forgives you no matter what. Mm-hmm. He is all forgiving God, and might not like what you did, but as long as you feel bad for what you've done wrong, he'll take care of you. Yep. So I kind of connected with the parent side of it. Not that I hope I don't think I ruined my kids, but
no, you still have plenty of time.
Yeah.
You're just getting started, man.
Yeah. But, just being able to know, we're all sinners, it's just moving forward and trying to do your best, was kind of really eye-opening for me. So.
Yeah. Mine was the same one. And that's for me, God doesn't count anyone out. Mm-hmm. Other people may have. I mean, when Moses is trying to help, the two, Israelites who are fighting, he goes, "Hey, you guys are brothers." It's like, "You gonna kill me too now?" Yeah. Like, I killed that guy.
Yeah.
but the fact that as much as the Israelite people were ready to dismiss him, God was already working on a plan to use him to save everyone else, and so the fact that God doesn't rule us out because we've done something stupid, made mistakes, or committed murder. His love and mercy, grace surpasses it all.
Yep. I think that's a great way to end it.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us again. Hit that like button. Let us know what you hear. Leave a question or comment in the comment box. Again, if you leave one there, we will engage it. Hope you guys have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, depending when you're watching this. And so we'll see you next week. Take care, and God bless.
See you, everyone.